Tom sat in the dim light of their tiny apartment, the only sound the soft, steady breathing of his sleeping daughter. Her small hand curled around his finger even in sleep, a quiet reminder of everything he fought for. He was bone-tired, his body aching from back-to-back security shifts, but he wouldn't trade this moment for anything. The table in the corner sagged under the weight of unpaid bills and final notices. He tried not to look at them. Instead, he brushed a strand of hair from his daughter's face and whispered, "I'll keep you safe. Always." On the dresser nearby sat an old, worn photo of him in uniform, younger and harder-eyed, standing with his unit. A trained soldier. A man who'd seen things he tried to forget. Those skills were locked away now, tucked behind a promise he'd made to himself and to the little girl who needed him to be something better. He worked low-paying jobs that left him exhausted but honest. He wanted her to grow up in a world where she felt secure, even if he went without. But tonight, as the clock ticked past midnight and his eyes burned from fatigue, a wave of helplessness washed over him. No matter how many hours he worked, the bills kept coming. Rent was overdue. The school needed fees he didn't have. He felt the pressure building in his chest, a silent scream he refused to let out. He swallowed hard and wiped his eyes. She stirred in her sleep, and he immediately calmed himself, not wanting her to sense his fear. She deserved a childhood untouched by worry. He traced the edge of the photo frame with his thumb, remembering training that had made him into something lethal, something useful, once. But he had sworn those days were over. He wouldn't let violence be what defined him. He wouldn't be that man again. Yet deep down, he feared a truth he rarely admitted: he might not have a choice. The world was cruel. People did terrible things. And if it ever came to it, if she was threatened, if there was no other way, he knew he'd use those old, terrible skills again without hesitation. For her. Always for her. He had a skill he hoped he'd never use again, until he had no choice. Tom was heading home as the city pulsed with its usual chaos: honking cars, people glued to their phones, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows between glass towers. He clutched a thin plastic bag of groceries, thinking of the cheap spaghetti he'd promised his daughter for dinner. His mind was a fog of exhaustion, but he forced himself to focus on getting home before she worried. Then it happened in a blink. A black SUV roared up to the curb so violently that pedestrians scattered. The doors flew open, and masked men spilled out like a nightmare made real. He saw them grab a woman in a sharp navy suit, her heels scraping the pavement as she fought to pull free. Her purse fell, scattering its contents: papers, a silver pen, a phone skittering across concrete. For a moment, the whole street went silent, save for the woman's muffled scream. Bystanders froze, staring wide-eyed, their brains refusing to process the violence playing out in front of them. A man fumbled for his phone to record it, not help. A mother clutched her child and turned away. But Tom's eyes narrowed. Something cold and razor-sharp cut through his exhaustion. All those years of training, all the things he tried to bury, surged up in him with a terrible clarity. The world seemed to slow down. He saw one of the kidnappers shove the woman into the SUV. He saw the driver glance back, hand on the gearshift. He saw fear in the woman's eyes, pure, helpless terror. He didn't hesitate. He didn't think about the groceries dropping, the eggs cracking on the sidewalk, the crowd gasping. He didn't think about rent or bills or what would happen if he got hurt. He just ran. Every muscle remembered what to do. He charged, feet slamming the pavement, a raw shout tearing from his throat to distract them. In that split second, the kidnappers turned, startled by the sudden fury of an ordinary man. He didn't think, he just ran. They crashed into the narrow alley, the world a blur of motion and panic. Tom's breath rasped in his chest as he yanked Emily behind a dumpster just as one of the kidnappers lunged after them. Without thinking, he shifted his weight, grabbed the man's arm, and twisted hard. Bone cracked, the man howled, his weapon clattering to the ground. Tom didn't pause. He slammed his shoulder into the attacker's chest, sending him sprawling. "Move," he barked at Emily, grabbing her wrist. She didn't argue, her expensive heels snapping on the pavement as she stumbled to keep up. They raced through the maze of backstreets, Tom's mind mapping the route instantly, calculating escape paths the way he once did in war zones. The kidnappers' shouts echoed behind them, bullets striking brick walls. He zigzagged, pulling her through side doors, over a low fence, under a rusted fire escape. The city felt like a trap he knew by heart. Finally, when they'd put enough twists and turns behind them, he stopped. Emily collapsed against a wall, gasping, clutching a stitch in her side. Her sleek hair was tangled, her designer suit smeared with dirt. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to steady her breathing. Who are you?" she choked out, voice raw with terror and disbelief. Tom scanned the alley, eyes sharp, muscles coiled to spring if needed. Slowly, he turned to her, his face softening. For a moment he looked tired, unbearably so, like a man who'd carried too much for too long. "Someone who knows how to get you home," he said quietly. Emily stared at him, searching his eyes. She saw something there, a terrible, heavy knowledge of violence. But also a promise. A father's promise. Her fear eased just a little. She wiped her tears roughly, trying to regain composure, but she was shaking. He reached out, steadying her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. Their eyes met, and in that shared glance she understood this man wasn't just rescuing her. He was fighting his own demons to do it. He was using skills he never wanted to use again, all because he refused to watch someone else's life be destroyed. He thought he was saving her. He didn't know she would save him, too. The harsh fluorescent lights of the police station flickered overhead as Emily sat at a battered metal desk, her hands trembling as she signed her statement. Her suit was torn, makeup streaked, but her voice stayed steady as she recounted every detail. Officers murmured reassurances, one draping a blanket over her shoulders. Across the room, Tom stood silently against the wall, arms crossed, gaze lowered. He looked out of place among the uniforms and sterile bureaucracy. A man who had done something violent to prevent something worse. His clothes were dirty from the chase, a rip in his sleeve, dried blood on his knuckles he hadn't bothered to clean. Emily's eyes kept darting over to him. The detectives finally left her alone. She pushed back from the table and walked slowly toward him. He didn't move, didn't speak, just met her gaze with a tired resignation. "They told me," she began softly, voice cracking. She swallowed hard. "They told me you work security. 2 jobs. That you're a single dad." Tom's jaw tightened. He nodded once. Her eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. "Why?" she asked in a whisper. "Why would you risk your life like that, for someone you didn't even know?" He exhaled, eyes briefly closing before finding hers again. His voice was quiet, almost ashamed of its own vulnerability. "Because someone needs you," he said. "Like my little girl needs me. That's it." Silence fell between them. Emily felt something in her chest crack open at his words. She saw the exhaustion in his slumped shoulders, the protective fury that still lingered in his eyes. She didn't see a stranger anymore. She saw a father who would sacrifice anything to keep someone safe, even someone he'd never met. A tear finally slipped free. She reached out and took his battered hand in hers, squeezing it tight. "Thank you," she whispered, voice thick. For the first time that night, Tom's eyes softened, the hardness in them breaking just a little. She saw not just a hero, but a father who would do anything for his child. The view from Emily's office was breathtaking, glittering skyscrapers, the soft glow of the city lights below, stretching far into the horizon. It was a far cry from the worn-out streets where Tom had once barely scraped by. Now, here he stood, in a crisp suit, his posture still a bit stiff but undeniably different. The man in front of her was someone she hadn't expected to meet when she'd first been pulled from that SUV, but someone she was grateful to know. Emily extended her hand, her smile warm and genuine. "Welcome aboard, Tom." He shook her hand firmly, but his eyes held a quiet disbelief. He still couldn't quite wrap his head around the fact that this was happening, this new life, this new beginning. Months had passed since the kidnapping. Since the moment he had pulled her from the fire. Emily, now a friend, had kept in touch, and when the position for head of security at her company became available, she knew who she had to offer it to. The job was everything Tom had dreamed of: good pay, benefits that would take care of his daughter's future, and, perhaps most importantly, a real sense of purpose. He wasn't just scraping by anymore, he was leading, protecting, making a difference. As they shook hands, a small voice cut through the moment. Tom turned just as his daughter, now bright-eyed and grinning, came running through the door. She flung herself into his arms, giggling. "Dad," she cried, her little face lighting up. Tom caught her easily, his heart swelling. She turned to Emily, her innocent gaze locking with hers. "Hi. I'm Sarah." Emily knelt down, her smile softening as she looked at the little girl. She gently took Sarah's hand. "Well, it's nice to meet you, Sarah. Your dad is my hero." Tom's throat tightened at the words. He hadn't expected to hear that, he had only hoped he was doing enough. The gratitude he felt, for the first time in years, threatened to spill over. He blinked, clearing the sudden rush of emotion. "Thank you," he managed, his voice thick. For all the sacrifices he had made, all the hardships he had endured, this moment was the one that filled him with a sense of peace. He had done the right thing. He had saved her life, and in doing so, he had found his own salvation. He saved her life. She changed his forever. As Emily watched them together, a thought drifted into her mind. She knew now that kindness had a way of finding its way back to you, sometimes when you least expected it, in ways that completely changed your life. Sometimes the kindness you give the world finds its way back to you in ways you'd never expect.